Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Maxwell Frost, and I'm the National Organizing Director for March for Our Lives. But before we begin today, we'd like to give special thanks to our partner, Community Justice Action Fund, who we're going to hear from in a little bit. But we'd like to welcome all 269 of y'all and everybody who's watching on social media through Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Today, we're talking about the power of our civic engagement and what that means in the current political climate and everything going on in the world right now. And we're super. But to start off the day, to start off the show, we really need to get lit. We all need to get up. We all need to get dancing. And so we're super excited to have an artist that does a lot of work with March for Our Lives perform. Give it up all the way from Brooklyn, New York. I need everyone to give it up for our very own Phony People.
Love, big love. Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy. Don't forget it. Do not forget it. This first joint we're going to hit you with is called Compromise. So if you know it, sing along. Everybody put your hands together. Here we go. She won't settle down. He says she's the one, just not now. He loves her very much, and she knows. They're getting out of touch, so she knows. Oh, keep on doing Cheers, ladies and gentlemen, cheers. Hey, hey, hey. Just keep on doing that thing you do. Oh, just keep on doing that thing you do. Oh, keep on doing the thing you do. Oh, keep on breaking hearts you feel. Keep on doing that thing you do. Keep on doing that thing you do. Yeah. Keep on doing that thing you do. Keep on doing that thing you do. Yeah. Compromise.
Thank you, thank you, thank you to the one and only Phony PPL, Phony People, all the way from Brooklyn, New York. Give it up. Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce a good brother of mine, the National Advocacy Director of the Community Justice Action Fund, an organization doing some amazing work on the ground. So everybody, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Gregory Jackson.
Y'all can hear me? All right. Let me put the fist pumps up. This is like a rally. Yo, thank y'all so much for having me. I love Phony People's music. I was jamming, especially with the little doll thing. That was amazing. Excited to be here. I'm Greg Jackson with the Community Justice Action Fund. Also a survivor of gun violence. I've been advocating and a part of the gun violence prevention movement for now 7 years. And I've seen so much progress, but so much of that progress has happened because young folks have joined the fight. You guys have breathed such a big breath of fresh air into this large fight to save lives and end gun violence and police violence across the country. So I want to just thank you all so much for all that you're doing, all 316 of you all for joining today. At CJF, our entire focus is building power in communities of color, especially those who have been most impacted by gun violence, to create the policy solutions and be the leaders at the front of the movement in their own local communities to address gun violence. Unfortunately, we've seen firsthand that over-policing and law enforcement is not the answer to reduce gun violence. And it's also not the answer to make these communities safer. And so at our organization, we are focused on how are we investing in Black and Brown communities, investing in violence intervention and prevention programs that proactively address the problems of gun violence all across the country. So hopefully you guys will join us. We have a few big campaigns that we're working on right now. Our big one is in collaboration with our friends at March for Our Lives, Peace is Essential, where we're fighting all over the country to make sure that violence intervention and prevention programs in communities of color are being considered essential during this COVID-19 pandemic, that the resources and funding are remaining in those communities, and that not only are we keeping them essential, but when this whole epidemic is over, we double down our investments in these neighborhoods and these communities to help them bounce back from, unfortunately, all the challenges that have been impacted Black and Brown communities because of this pandemic. Someone's driving a motorcycle outside my house. That's awesome. So yeah, tune in from home. Specifically, when we're talking about the importance of our civic engagement and voting, we are hyper-focused on really building long-term political power in these same communities. You know, there's no reason why leaders who are organizing mentorship programs, youth outreach, violence intervention programs aren't also the same people who are running for office. But we know that takes political power. And so over the year in 2020, we are helping to build local teams in these same neighborhoods to help organize their own ways of registering folks to vote, persuading their neighbors to get out to vote, and then ultimately turning out to vote to fight for the issues, the candidates, and then one day become the candidates needed to end gun violence in their communities. So we're really excited about doing that. How we're doing it, the first cool thing we've done is we've created a model which basically shows you who in these communities that have been impacted by gun violence, who are the folks who have been directly impacted, how many incidents have happened right near them or in their neighborhood, and what's their voting status, so that we can also inform and engage people who have already been negatively impacted and show them how that connects directly to the electoral side of this entire fight. So not only are we organizing folks, we are targeting those who are most impacted and making sure they have the tools and resources to change the conditions around gun violence in their own communities. So we're really, really excited about that. One more, a big announcement I want to share with you. Our first organizing organizing associate is starting on Monday, and hopefully she will be on the next one, taking my spot, but talking about more specific work that we're doing at the very localized level. And so we're excited to have her on our team, and we're excited to be partnering with March for Our Lives throughout this year to really get out the vote and make sure we have more voters, more elected officials, and more policies in place to end gun violence. So lastly, I want to ask you all real quick, if you can, just take out your phones, if you're not on your phone during this, and I want you to text justice, the word justice, to 79606, and that will add you to our quick update list, and you will be updated about local events in your area, as well as kind of large ways that we can take action and react or do rapid response to some of the major issues we're seeing around justice, around gun violence, around police violence, and most importantly, around how we are investing in these communities. So text justice to 79606. Thank you guys so much. I'm gonna be here for the rest of the party. Appreciate you, Max, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you so much, Greg. Next up, we have the honor of introducing one of our fellow organizers from Sunrise Movement. Please give it up for Jimena Turner, all the way from California.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's super dope seeing all these young leaders on this call, and I'm so happy to share this space with you all. So like I was introduced, I am a organizer with the Sunrise Movement, which is a youth-led climate movement that works towards ending the climate crisis by advocating for a Green New Deal and creating millions of good jobs in the process. And civic engagement for us is one of our most valuable tools as a movement. For us, engagement takes the form of organizing marches and strikes, commenting on public hearings concerning new policies, engaging our elected leaders, and most importantly, holding them accountable for adopting legislation that helps end our current climate crisis. And the intersection of the Black Lives Movement and the climate crisis isn't super obvious for everybody, but if you're thinking, what is a climate organization's role in this movement? To put it simply, there is no climate justice without racial justice. So the Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that we see dying at the hands of police and experiencing gun violence and systemic racism are the same people that are experiencing the worst effects of the climate crisis. Things like fossil fuel extraction, mass pollution, and the health effects that come with that are all symptoms of systemic racism. And having mass amounts of our money channeled into police forces and not back into these communities really upholds this inequality. So we at Sunrise, we're still fighting for a Green New Deal, but we're also centering the movement for Black lives in our work currently. One of our big things right now is helping elect candidates who fight not just for the climate, but for the dignity of Black people in this country. And that's one of our focal points right now. And these candidates, more often than not, are people of color, and they're representing communities that are typically represented by white people, people who don't really reflect the community. And, you know, we need more diversity in our elected officials if we want to get stuff done. Most recently, we've been making tons of calls. We made over 1 million calls this past week for progressive candidates, and a lot of those candidates actually ended up winning. And we're also focused on seeing, you know, defunding the police and that momentum nationwide. We're seeing large portions of city budgets going into police departments, even now when the police are very clearly illustrating how fatal and dangerous they are to communities of color. This past Friday, was Juneteenth, and I'm sure a lot of you celebrated that, kind of the day we celebrate our free-ishness here in this country. And Sunrise, in commemoration and solidarity, we did various actions across the US calling to defund the police and invest that money into our Black communities. My hub in Sonoma County, that's an hour north of San Francisco, if you're not familiar, we actually looked at our city bar graph and we kind of just made an art installation. We made a physical bar graph out of boxes showing how much we're giving to our police department compared to something that's super essential like housing, which actually face severe budget cuts. And a visual like that spoke to many people, got them interested, and ultimately we got them to call into the city council meeting and express their opinion. So that sense of civic engagement, even though it's an arts installation, really got people involved and got them into the movement. So for us, phone banking for candidates we believe in, visual art, talking to our elected officials, mass protests are just a few of the ways the Sunrise Movement practices civic engagement. We as a movement value the importance of making youth voices heard. And when we engage with officials publicly, we make our demands loud and known in public spaces, our presence is known, and we are actively educating our community on the issues that they might not be aware of. And the basis of our movement is on passing a Green New Deal, which are pieces of legislation that will advance a just transition of labor and create jobs, but also putting in efforts in solidarity with the Black Lives Movement. Both of these goals all involve planning and executing direct actions, and our successes really rely on having elected officials in office that will help us pass legislation. The objective of our direct actions is to engage with our community members and catch the attention of our local elected officials. And direct actions help convey that these issues are important to us, that they matter, and they have dire consequences if they're not acted upon. So it's important to realize we are in a time of environmental and racial crisis. And in many communities, this is not being taken seriously. So direct actions like sitting in a senator's office or staging a die-in or protesting at your local police department, these initiate conversations that might not be had otherwise. And it isn't uncommon for us to have voter registration booths at our climate strikes and other actions because political engagement is so fundamental to reaching the goals we want. Here in Sonoma County, we're seeing a lot of political engagement. Recently, we got the mayor of a very affluent white town kicked out of office. She had to resign because she verbally said that, this Black Lives Matter movement, this police brutality issue is not a problem in her community. And that basically is not true. You have tons of racism all over the place. And California is known as this liberal bubble, but we still experience all these injustices. And it's really important that we get out there and make these elected leaders see hey, this is a problem. If you're not going to fix it, you got to get out of here. So all too often we see stories like this where racism gets brushed aside and buried by people that are supposed to be representing us and helping us out. But however, we see times are changing. We have people stepping up to the plate and doing the work that gets these people out of office. And it's never too late to start doing your research on who can replace those people, who's running for city council, who's running for mayor, who's running for Senate in your area. It's not too late to hop on that and get hyped about a candidate that you really like. And that involves, maybe going out there and phone banking or canvassing and just advocating. So I think that's a really important part. Getting those bad people out and getting those good people in, and making sure people are registered to vote, and making sure people are aware of all candidates before they go into the voting booth. And I know there's a lot of younger people on here who may not be of voting age, but hey, you can still get out there, phone bank, canvass, you can do all those things. So don't let your age deter you. You might not be able to vote, but you can help get out the vote just as effectively. And an important tool for that, for getting people to vote, is to paint the picture of the future that you want. So that livable future we envision as part of the Green New Deal and reinvestment of police funds into our communities of color, that's something that you need to paint the picture for it and, get people hyped on that ideal. A community free of police brutality, air pollution, and systemic racism. The world we want includes good jobs, equality for all people, no matter their race, gender, or sexual orientation. A just, livable future comes from eradicating barriers for everyone. And to get to this world, we must vote and we must get out the vote. And an important part of that is eliminating voter suppression in our Black communities. And we have to take actions that inform voters to start building a livable future. And we're all seeing this wave of people on Instagram doing their thing, posting Black Lives Matter. But this change doesn't happen overnight, and it's not a trend. This is a long movement that we're going to be a part of for such a long time. And I encourage you to get out there, do direct actions, engage civically, talk to your local elected officials. all of that is super important. And again, age doesn't matter. Honestly, I see a lot of people paying more attention to the youth vote and to what young people have to say. So do not let age stop you. So yeah, get out there, strike, organize, vote, and vote for people who cannot. Elevate the voices of those who are often disenfranchised and silenced. You can get involved in civic engagement and direct actions with March for Our Lives. You can get involved with the Sunrise Movement. If you have a hub in your area, you can start a hub in your area if you don't have one. And there are tons of resources out there for you to educate yourself. And please share those tools so you can educate your friends, family, teachers, whoever is around you. So keep marching, keep signing petitions, keep reading. And I'm super happy to be here with you all. And I hope to see you out in these streets come November. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Nina. All right, moving right along. I'm really proud to introduce one of our staff members on March for Our Lives, but also someone who has been organizing on the ground on a daily basis, advocating for Black lives, but really advocating and being an activist and an organizer for justice for all people. So please give it up for our very own Tatiana Washington.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Amazing. First of all, I just want to say, like, it's hard to follow the steps of Nina. I always say in every single, whenever I speak, to listen to Black women, listen to Nina, like she really snapped. So, but hi everyone, I'm so excited to be here with you all. Again, I'm one of the state policy associates with March for Our Lives. And I know so many of you have been out there protesting, whether it's been physically or digitally or virtually, including myself. I'm here in Milwaukee and been with my peers and with organized events. And, you know, police brutality has been an issue in this country for so long. And I'm so glad that other folks are realizing it and waking up to this issue. But for me, this is very personal. I lost my aunt in 2017 to gun violence. Her husband, who was a police officer, used his work-issued gun and murdered my aunt before he turned the gun on himself. And also, I grew up with both my parents are in law enforcement, so this is very personal for me. And you know, as I've been out on the grounds, not even just now with this movement that I think is definitely going to make a change, even years before, there's always been this disconnect between movement politics and protesting and electoral politics, or at least it seems that way. There feels this weird disconnect. But I want to stress that, voting is a tool in our toolbox that cannot be the only tool that we use. We have to keep protesting. We can't let this momentum go down. If your civic engagement is only during election season, if it's only to campaign for a candidate, you're not doing enough. We need to make sure that we're holding the electeds that we have in office accountable 24/7 because they work for us, right? We have to make sure we hold them accountable. But with that being said, we also need to make sure we're voting the right folks in, and we also need to make sure we're voting them out when they're not acting right. So, they go hand in hand, and I cannot stress that enough. We can't keep pushing and just being like, vote, 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 and then not do protesting. We can't go out and protest and then not talk about voting. Like, they go hand in hand. They're tools in our toolbox to be civic engaged. That's what democracy is. And again, like our electeds, they work for us. And I really want to stress that they work for us. And voting is the way that we tell them that they're doing their job. They're not doing their job. Okay, so I know a lot of people, a lot of young people, they may feel frustrated right now with everything that's going on, maybe wondering when is something going to change. And, we may think that we might not get some radical change through electoral politics. And maybe we won't, maybe at least not within the next 4 years. But it's also important that we're electing folks that will listen to us. And I would love to go back and quote my idol, my inspiration, Angela Davis. I think she spoke about this really well with electoral politics. We need to, what did she say? We need to vote so we can support ourselves and our ability to organize and place pressure on those in power. And I think that's really important that we're making sure that we go register to vote, making sure that people in our community are able to exercise their right to vote. And I'm sure you'll hear much more about this later. I'm not an expert on this, but voter suppression, like we need to make sure that we are pushing for democracy reforms. So making sure every single person in this country is able to exercise their right to vote. And so we can keep doing that radical protesting and get radical change. And I'll just give this very short and personal, not really personal, but anecdote of what we've seen. I think Greg spoke about this, how young people getting involved in the movement. In 2018, the midterms, there was a historic amount of gun violence prevention champions that were elected into Congress. And, we got bills passed that we probably would have never gotten passed had we not had those champions elected in office. We've had a background check bill passed. We've had hearings on gun violence prevention that we haven't had hearings on gun violence prevention in, 8 years or so. And that's due to the work of all of you listening. It's due to the work of all the Black and Brown organizers and communities that have been holding their electeds accountable for years. And that's because we are protesting. So, when we go vote, we have to make sure we think about that. When we go protest, we have to go think about that. I know I've been seeing conversations when I've been protesting, imagine if all the folks that are attending these protests go and vote. That would be huge, right? And I think we have to think about this as who is the best to harm reduction. But again, we have to keep fighting. We have to keep physically and digitally and virtually protesting. We have to do both. We cannot let this momentum go down. And again, we need to make sure that we're making sure folks in our community know and have voter education and are able to go vote and exercise their right to vote. And just, keep fighting. We cannot let this momentum go down with the fight for Black lives and the fight for gun violence prevention. We cannot let this momentum go down. So now I am so excited, the moment that you've all been waiting for. Amina, who is our Georgia State Director, and Stacey Abrams, who's Fair Fight 2020 founder, will be doing a Q&A and we'll speaking with you all. I'm so excited to introduce them.
Hi, thank you all so much for joining, and thank you so much, Stacey, for coming on and talking with us. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Glad to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you. I feel like we should just jump right into our discussion. So I really want to ask you, what inspired you to pursue public service, and how did you first get involved?
I grew up in southern Mississippi. I am the daughter of a shipyard worker and a librarian. My parents were best described as working poor. They both worked full-time jobs. My mom was the only one of her 7 siblings to finish high school. My dad was the only man in his family to go to college, but they still struggled. They both went to college. My mom went to grad school, and yet my mom made less money than the janitor who cleaned the college where she was the head librarian. And my father, because he's dyslexic and grew up dyslexic in segregated Mississippi in the 1950s, he didn't really learn to read until he was in his 30s. He memorized his way through school. And so, we could have grown up very bitter about everything. My mom liked to use different terms of art to describe our lives. When she called us the genteel poor, because we read books and we watched TV. We read books and we watched PBS. When the lights got cut off, or when we had no running water, she called that urban camping. So she had lots of different ways to sort of describe why the lack of what we had wasn't going to change who we were. But they also told us that our job was to serve, that you had to go to church, go to school, and take care of each other. Go to school because education was the reason that even though they hadn't gotten as far as they thought they would, they'd gotten further than anyone else in their families. They said go to church because they wanted us to have not only a faith to ground us, but they wanted us to see ourselves as part of a bigger community. And they told us to serve because they wanted us to know that not that we were doing something for others, but that we had a responsibility. If you saw a problem, it was your job to fix it. And so as a young person, we volunteered. We point out to my parents, like, we're out volunteering. I'm like, we're poor too. Like, we're giving away food and we don't have a lot at home. But my dad would say, having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. And my mom's more eloquent way of putting it was, no matter how little you have, there's someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. My life has been about meeting what my parents taught me, which is that you serve, that you fix the problems you see, you serve because you should. Your faith should be a shield and never a sword to strike people down. And you learn what you can to make the world better. And so that got me into public service. I grew up not having money, so I got used to that part early on. So it's never really been an issue. And that's why I do what I do.
Well, thank you for everything, and that is a lesson that I feel like we all can take away. Now, how can young people be more involved in the fight for voting justice? Because we live in Georgia, and I feel like that is a major point, especially since you founded Fair Fight 2020. How can we get more involved?
The issue of voter suppression is not endemic to Georgia. It is singular in Georgia. We are really good at it. We are very good at voter suppression, but it happens across the country. And we have to remember that the beginning of voter suppression was not the 1960s. It wasn't 2013. It was the inception of our country. We live in a nation that from its, we have this wonderful Declaration of Independence, but the documents that counted have never counted most of us. And so the very beginning, the only people permitted to vote in our country were white men who owned land. By some estimations, that was 6% of the population. Black people weren't considered human. Native Americans were invisible. Women were supposed to be silent. And because of the Naturalization Act of 1790, anyone else who made it here wasn't going to be allowed to be a citizen. Every piece of progress we have made since then has been in spite of our organizing documents, not because of it. And I say that to say, America isn't who we are because of the paperwork. We're who we are because of the people work. Yes. And our people work is what's going to make the next generation of change possible. It's the people work of volunteering. A lot of you know communities where you had long lines, whether you're in Georgia or in Texas or in New York, in Kentucky, in Wisconsin. We need young people to actually volunteer to be poll workers. You actually get paid for the job, but we need you to sign up to be in there, because a lot of the folks getting turned away, being told they can't vote, are young people. And so we need young people to be, instead of waiting for the system to change, take over the system. Be the person who checks somebody in, who makes certain that they get to vote, who makes certain that they know the rules. So that's number one. Number two, make sure everyone you have ever met is registered to vote.
Yes.
We have to overwhelm the system because voter suppression is only going to get worse. The Republican National Committee has committed to $60 million in private and basically through soft and hard dollars. They're going to raise up to $60 million for voter security. That means voter intimidation. They are going to put together 50,000 volunteers, their poll patrol. The last time they did this, they had people wearing armbands, walkie-talkies, and sidearms because these were off-duty officers in 1981. And it was so bad, a federal court told the Republican National Committee they couldn't participate, and it lasted for almost 40 years. Surprise, surprise, this is the first year they get to do it again. Only this year, they're going to have off-duty ICE officers, off-duty law enforcement, folks who are really unhappy about Black Lives Matter, who are really unhappy about the Dreamer decision from the Supreme Court, who are really unhappy about the LGBTQ decision from the Supreme Court. So we need our own army. We need a double army of people who are ready to protect the right to vote. And the third thing I would say is we have to remember that it's not just about voting, it's also about the census. Young people are the most likely in community to need the resources that the census provides, and they're the least likely to be able to participate. So if you live at a home, make sure your parents, whoever your head of household is, has filled out the census. Right now, people of color are the least likely to be counted: immigrants, young people, renters, and rural folks. That's going to cost us up to, just people of color being undercounted. The expected undercount is going to cost us $8 billion every year. And let's understand what that means. That means no school lunches. That means overcrowded classrooms. That means no money for the community programs that we need in response to police brutality. That means no funding for the community programs that help remove guns from the neighborhoods. But it also means no Pell Grants. All of those dollars are the dollars we need. And if we don't get counted, we don't count. So be registered, be a poll worker, and be counted in the census. Those are the 3 things we need you to do. And the 2 groups I started are Fair Fight to do the work of the voter protection, and Fair Count to make sure people get counted. And I'm happy to help anybody who wants to help push this forward in your communities get that work done.
Yeah, you basically highlighted that the power is in our hands. We have the power to make the change that we want to see. Well, as part of March for Our Lives, we deeply believe in the power of voting and the power of direct actions. What do you think is the best way for movements and organizations to utilize both in the fight for justice?
I was raised by activists. My mom and dad were both involved in the civil rights movement. My dad was arrested at the age of 14, registering Black people to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. My mom was doing the same work. She was just smart enough not to get caught. But they wanted, they didn't just talk about the importance of activism, they lived it. When we were growing up, they did 2 things. My parents took us to protests. I protested apartheid, I protested poverty, I protested anti-LGBTQ communities and churches, but they also took us with them to vote. And I see these as the same, 2 sides of the same coin. We have to protest in the streets, but we also have to protest at the ballot boxes. The protest in the streets, the vocal protest, what March for Our Lives has done so extraordinarily well, is the only way you draw and hold attention. It's the way you focus the mind on what needs to be done, but it's also the way you educate people about things that their daily lives don't let them think about.
Yes.
When I was 18, I was involved in the protest in response to the Rodney King verdict.
Wow.
We were out there, we got tear gassed. They shut down our entire neighborhood and just tear gassed us all, whether you were in college or lived in the projects. We're all just bad Black kids, and they were done with all of us. But I then went down and protested directly. I fought with the mayor of Atlanta. I was one of the select group of kids brought down to have a conversation. And I basically said, you aren't doing anything for young people. What do you do for poor young people? And what he told me was to shut up. But he later hired me to work for the Office of Youth Services in the mayor's office, a newly created office that was created in part because of how I challenged him. And what you all have seen in the work that you've been able to do, the changes you've been able to make in state laws is extraordinary. And it's because we have to couple these things together. It's got to be about protest and policy. One without the other doesn't work, because protest feels good, but it doesn't deliver change. And policy that isn't guided by protest is usually pablum, is usually not enough, and it's easily dismissed. And so where you all are so critical, and why I'm so proud of the work you do, is that you understand both of those pillars and you push them forward and you hold people accountable, because the connective tissue is accountability.
Yes.
Being accountable when you protest, and being accountable when we elect people to make sure the policies are real and that they don't walk them back when the protests die down.
Yeah, you're definitely right. They both go hand in hand. One without the other is not going to get us anywhere. We have so many organizers in here and around the country that are at the front lines, that are organizing these protests and these direct actions. What do you think, what is your advice for them as they work to both disrupt and improve our system?
What you all have done so exceptionally well is be targeted in your message. But you know that message, while gun violence is the inception point, you understand that so much more surrounds it.
Yes.
And so you're not only focused on the conversation about the issue that drove your creation, but you understand that the March for Our Lives includes, and I got to hear the tail end of, it includes the conversation about environmental justice, includes the conversation about economic access, the end of food deserts. You don't have to fracture yourself into becoming advocates for every issue, but you have to be allies for all of those issues that drive gun violence, that drive the behaviors that are so damaging and so pathological. And so I think one of the pieces is knowing what your lane is, but being willing to, swerve sometimes.
Yeah.
That's critical. And sometimes we're taught that the more seasoned you get in policy and in protest, you're sort of told stay in your lane.
Yes.
I think you need to know your lane, but you need to know how all 12 lanes work. And sometimes that means you need to merge and figure it out. And so my first message is don't get told what to do by those who have forgotten what it feels like.
Yeah.
Listen to the advice, but synthesize it with what your current knowledge tells you. Mm-hmm. 2, is recognize that you have allies who don't know they're allies yet because they don't know your story. And the young woman who, I think it was Tatiana who spoke before we got on, her personal story about understanding the impact of gun violence and being the daughter of law enforcement. Like, those stories validate the legitimacy of the moment, but they also spur action. So never be ashamed to tell your story. But that also means being willing to listen to other people's stories, especially the people who you think oppose you.
Yes.
I was effective in the legislature at getting good done because I listened to the people, not only who supported me, but I listened to the people who hated me, because I needed to know what their problem was. You can't fight an enemy you don't understand. And sometimes we are so solid in our beliefs that we fail to know we can get intel from the other side if we're paying attention. And so create the space to let the people who disagree with you tell you what they disagree with, so you can use that as ammunition to get what you need.
Definitely. And I feel like you kind of highlighted the point that we at March for Our Lives believe that gun violence is not a standalone issue. It stems from poverty. It stems from the lack of education, the lack of resources, it's based on a systemic level. And I just want to thank you for answering my questions. And I feel like Mariah Cooley is a organizer at Howard, and I feel like she has a question for you.
Yes, Mariah.
Hi, it's really nice to meet you. Like she said, I am the legislative director and co-founder of March for Our Lives at Howard University. And so my question for you is, outside of police reform, in your opinion, what are other strategies that could be implemented in order to rectify historic injustices?
So I started my work in college actually around environmental justice. I worked for the EPA for 2 summers. I wrote my thesis on environmental justice, looking at the effect of pollutants on impoverished communities, namely communities of color. And so I think when we talk about systemic inequities, we have to remember, as you both said, that it undergirds so many parts of our lives. And so one of the places I think we have to think about on a local level is what's happening in the education of our schools. Do you have a school system that's near you that's not only being undereducated, but that's being underserved? So fighting for educating the whole child. You guys are young enough that you actually remember being in high school. For me, is a very fond, distant memory. But you know what those impediments have been to being able to get a good education, whether it's under-resourcing because the school board doesn't put enough money into books, into school lunches, into making sure kids can take food home with them when they're done. And so find the piece that is as close to you as possible, the policy that is the most offensive to you beyond the issue, and work on that. Because so often we think about dismantling systems from the top. We forget the systems are the strongest at the bottom, that the foundation of racism, the foundation of inequity often begins with the things we take for granted the most, like our public school system, like where libraries are located or not located, like where they put landfills. And so thinking about the local action, it is critical that we pay attention to the president and the Congress, but we leave so much on the table because we don't pay attention. We don't hold accountable the people closest to us making those choices, because those are the people who are the easiest to get rid of. It is much easier to unseat a school board member than it is to unseat a congressman. But when you unseat enough of them, you also create space to put people who share your values into their jobs.
So much for that.
Thank you, Mariah. You guys can ask questions in the chat or tweet #OurPower to ask some questions. I saw this one from @LoudMomFriend. She says, any advice for how to stay continuously engaged without losing energy or momentum?
So I think that when people say the phrase work-life balance, it is a damned lie.
Yes.
It is a lie from the pit of hell. There is no such thing as work-life balance. And there is no such thing as continuous engagement. Nothing runs continuously without burning out, except for something that doesn't accomplish much. And so we've got to give ourselves permission to have work-life Jenga, to have activism, personal life Jenga. That is, you do what you can and you pull out each piece and you try to stack it up so that you get everything done that you need to do. But when it falls apart, you need to let it fall, because part of the joy of Jenga is trying to rebuild it stronger. But if you never let it fall, if it's always precarious and listing, you're spending as much energy trying to keep it up as you are trying to do something. And so I do a lot. I've done a lot, but I always create space to let myself not be successful, because the world's not going to get fixed by me, and it's not going to be broken by me, but I can be broken by it if I don't give myself permission to repair. And that's the space that we have to really think about. Do what you can, but when you find yourself doing less than you think is possible, not because you don't want to, but because you physically can't, you emotionally can't, you psychologically can't, that's the moment you have to step back, because if you're noticing it, you've already ticked off at least 10 people you didn't pay attention to.
Thank you. I feel like a lot of us in here and who are watching definitely needed to hear that. From Brenna McCallum, she says, how can we help with voter suppression in this year's election? What just happened in Georgia and Kentucky? How could we have shown up?
So part of the reason I created Fair Fight 2020 in 2019 was that voter suppression is a very nimble enemy. It has this very basic architecture. Can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast your ballot? And can your ballot get counted? But it looks different in every single state, because one of the flaws in our Constitution is that while American citizens are given the right to vote, the states have the authority to administer elections. And what that means is the very states that are bad actors get to be in charge of making themselves good actors. And how often does a villain reform himself unless there's like some cataclysmic event? Exactly. Lex Luthor has to be in Bizarro world before he gets better. And so in America, voter suppression has been persistent because the states were only held in check probably for the 50-year history of the Voting Rights Act until in 2013 when they eviscerated Section 5. So I say all that to say this. Part of what we were doing, what we've been doing in this primary, is understanding what suppression looks like in the multiple states, because they change every time it's like whack-a-mole. Every time we uncover something they've done wrong, they change it just enough that they can do something else. And so you all showed up. You showed up by voting, because that was the most impressive part of this. Yes, voter suppression happened. It happened in primaries, and it happened in Georgia during judicial elections, which is why it's problematic. But what was critical was that more people showed up in Georgia for a primary for Democrats than any time in Georgia history. What happened in Kentucky, what happened in Wisconsin is that over and over, you all are showing up. So give ourselves credit in the primary for showing up, because what that did was reveal the breaks in the system. And so what we're doing now is using all of that data, using all of those stories, using all of this infrastructure. So we're prepared for November, because now we know what they're going to do. Now we know what their plan is. We know what they've been planning behind the scenes. And now we've seen in practice what the laws look like. And so just know that there's a whole universe of folks out there filing lawsuits to fix this. Mark Elias is doing amazing work. Voto Latino, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So many organizations, the Leadership Conference, are doing the work of trying to right size our elections, but we're going to need your help. And that's why I said, please go to fairfight2020.com to sign up. Make sure you join us, because we're going to need you to agree to be poll workers, to agree to be poll observers. We're going to need you to make sure folks are registered, that they have rides, because not every state's going to let folks vote from home. And that's the most important thing. But we need to remember that we had to find out in this election cycle, because I've been watching since, forever, but I saw in real time in 2018 what they did to the electorate.
Yes.
They did brand new stupid stuff this time.
Yes.
There was brand new evil. So
yes.
Even being prepared for the old evil meant we weren't prepared for the new evil, except in this way. We knew evil was coming, and we were ready to talk about it. We held them accountable. We helped make sure the polls stayed open longer. We got people chairs and food and water, and we got their story. So when we need to sue them to fix it, we're ready to go.
Oh yeah, it was a disaster to say the least this year, but at least we got something good out of it. I mean, the type of evil was just too much to say. Greg Jackson from the Community Justice Action Fund asks, how do we get stand your ground laws dismantled?
We have to elect new legislators. I mean, that's fundamentally it. So one of the reasons I try to remind folks that we're not just redoing the 2016 election in November. Everybody's paying attention to, yes, we need to get rid of Trump. Yes, we need to change the US Senate. But we need to remember what happened in 2010. So for those of you, like the 10 of you who were old enough to remember when Obama got elected because you were old enough to vote. Anyway, so you have the 2008 election. The world was different. In 2010, we didn't pay attention. It was a census year. And in a census year, the census outcome determines the districts for state legislative decisions for the next 10 years. The stand your ground laws that proliferated in part because of the elections of 2010. We are running the 2010 election in 2020. It's just being hidden in the shadows of the 2020 presidential election. But that's why the census is so critical, because the lines that get drawn by state legislatures in 2021 will be based on who responded to the 2020 census, but it will also be based on who got elected to the state legislature. So if you want to undo stand your ground laws, you've got to get rid of the state legislative members who do not believe that people deserve to live, even if they happen to wander into the wrong space, that murdering someone is not a reasonable solution to the problem. But that means we have to vote in this election all the way down the ballot, and we have to be in the census, because the only way the census can be challenged when it comes to drawing these legislative lines, in particular for communities of color, partisan gerrymandering is fine. Republicans, Democrats can do whatever they want, but they cannot, by constitution, it's unconstitutional to use race as the way they draw the lines, which is why they've worked so hard to make certain that immigrant populations and communities of color aren't finishing the census. You can't sue them if we never showed up. But if we show up, the census will then create the data creates the lines create the power, and the power creates the ability to get rid of stand your ground, to get rid of citizen arrest laws that allowed these two men to think that they had the right to murder Ahmaud Arbery. It changes everything. So pay attention to the census and vote all the way down the ballot, and make sure you know that everyone you know is voting on state legislative races, so we can take over these state legislatures and draw a decade of good to replace this decade of evil.
Yes, definitely. Organizer Amit Dadan asks, what is your proudest accomplishment in the Georgia Assembly, and what is one thing you wish you could have gotten through?
So I have to give you two. One was that I worked with a group of grandparents who came to see me, who'd been trying for years. They are raising grandchildren, raising kids that aren't their own. It's called kinship care. And a lot of us have kinship families where, like, my parents are raising my brother's daughter. They were getting less of the resources they needed because they were family, but they were expected to do exactly the same amount of work. And these are often retirees who have retired, barely able to take care of themselves. And now they had 2 or 3 children who they couldn't afford. I was able to get the Republican governor and the Republican state legislature to give them more money, but also for the first time in Georgia history, to make it legal for them to not only enroll in school, but to actually participate in extracurricular activities, which was unlawful in Georgia. So that was one. And the second was juvenile justice reform. I was able to work over successive years to finally change how we treated young people in the criminal justice system. This matters to me because I have a younger brother who's been in and out of prison. He was never in youth incarceration, but I know that what happened to him could happen to all these young people who are being treated as bad adults when they're simply confused kids. And so those were the 2 things I was proudest of. What I wish I could have done more of is that I wish I could have forced the expansion of Medicaid. State of Georgia, 500,000 people are being denied healthcare in the midst of COVID-19. 36% of them are African American, 22% are Latino. All of them are poor. And in one of the states hardest hit by COVID, they are not entitled to healthcare in our state. And that is something I wish I could have changed.
Thank you so much. And then our last question from the amazing March for Our Lives Midwest organizer, Linnea. How do you practice self-care?
I don't like self-care as much as I don't like the notion of work-life balance, because there are moments that require such intensity that the only respite you get is going to sleep. So sometimes I take a nap. In the middle of the day, I will tell my team I need 32 minutes, leave me alone and do not bother me. But I also watch an inordinate amount of television. I love TV. I find TV to be therapeutic, cathartic, and a wonderful thing. And I despise anyone who would dare disparage it. I love television. I read, I do all the other things you're supposed to do, but I am a devotee of the television and it makes me happy.
That I honestly agree 100% with what you just said. Thank you so much for talking with me. Do you have any last words for our amazing people that stayed on with us?
I just want to tell all of you that you're extraordinary. What you do, who you are, how you live your lives. You live lives of purpose, and you do so with such intention and such integrity. You are changing everything. And I apologize on behalf of Gen X for the stuff we didn't get done before you came along, but we're in this with you, and we're here to do whatever we can, because the March for Our Lives is a march for everyone, but we are happy to follow you on this path. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for talking with us. I would like to introduce Jackie as a founder of March for Our Lives, and I want to see what she has to say today.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jackie, a co-founder of March for Our Lives from Parkland, Florida, and I'm just here to close out the call. So first, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Miss Abrams and our other wonderful guest speakers, Nina from the Sunrise Movement and Greg from the Community Justice Action Fund, for your time and incredible insights. Through your words, we've learned about the intersections between racial justice, educational justice, environmental justice, and gun violence prevention, how to actively combat voter suppression that is endemic to our nation, as well as the importance of focusing on local and state elections and the Senate. Not the Senate, the census, sorry. It's so important to remember that there is so much we can do within our political system to reduce harm for people who bear the brunt of gun and police violence in this country, and to make sure our voices are heard within the political system, no matter our age. An additional note, March for Our Lives will be continuing to empower youth to become politically active via our local chapters. And shout out to all of the local March for Our Lives chapters and organizers on this call. And if you're not already organizing with March for Our Lives, all of our amazing regional organizing directors are going to put their emails in the chat so you can get connected. So go look at the chat. And last thing, I can't give away too much yet, but expect some really exciting things coming from March for Our Lives in the next few months. In the fall, we're going to be on the ground in 9 different states, educating youth in very unique ways about the most pressing issues of our time. So look out for more information from us in the coming weeks. And I hope that, y'all continue to stay engaged with us and support us. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for joining us this evening. Bye.
Just when you think you found me, the illusions in your eyes. That's why I love the moon. Every night it's there for you. It's constant. Unlike these human beings who lie about what it seems to be. You think the earth is where you stand. Someone's hand, and that's why I love the moon, 'cause it's always there for me.